tutors, mentors, and the city with your host.com.
The City Tutors presents
Tutors, mentors, and the city
with your host.com.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Kevin.com Brown, and thank you for joining us on Tutors, Mentors, and the City. And please, without any further ado, join me in welcoming my guest for this episode, Miss Kerry Ann King. Hey!
Hey, everybody.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, I'm excited. I'm excited to get down to it.
Yes. So this has been a typical question for me, but I'm gonna start it with this. Happy Women's History Month.
Thank you. I am definitely happy that it's Women's History Month. I have to say I'm a little ambivalent about the whole having months for things thing in general, but I'm ready. I think we should celebrate.
Yes, having months for things thing. That is real cool. That's a real cool way. How do we celebrate? This is a question in the Black community. We don't know how to celebrate Black History Month. We sure don't know how to celebrate Juneteenth. How do we celebrate Women's History Month?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. You know, for me, I joked with you that I'm celebrating Women's History Month by doing the laundry. I think there's a certain degree to which celebration might not be the right word, that maybe what it needs to be is more activation, getting ready to make change, dare I say, make revolution, because I feel like there's been progress. I'm not saying there hasn't been progress, but the reality is women still make less money than men. Women's rights to govern their own bodies are now under threat again, after how so many women in the generation before me fought for that not to be the case. So celebration feels like the wrong word. Activation feels like a more appropriate way to think about it.
Absolutely. So in the life of Kerry Ann King, do you face microaggressions? Do you recognize those things that someone like me in this country face every day?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's interesting how that has evolved for me as a woman as I've gone through my life. You know, I think early on, a lot of the microaggressions I experienced were around my physical appearance, right? Street hassling. When I was in graduate school for philosophy, I had a professor tell me I should not wear makeup because no one would ever take me seriously if I wore makeup. I was sexually harassed in my first job in a way that would definitely count as Me Too if I could remember the guy's name, but I blocked it out. It's like, so I think that has definitely been a theme for me. I think as I've aged, what's interesting is there's this shift from being judged by your appearance to becoming invisible as a woman because you're no longer interesting in terms of the way you appear. So there's a whole, swath of things that I would say count as microaggressions that just get different as your life changes.
Okay, so let's unpack a couple of things you mentioned. Share with us, our viewers, what your professional journey was, what your academic journey was like, where you are now in life. Share with us a little bit of that.
So I was very, very lucky to grow up in New York City and be a product of all the way through high school, the New York City public school system. I got a fantastic education. I got to go to Hunter High School, which, if you're familiar with it, is one of the selective high schools in New York City. And I am very lucky to say that I loved high school. I had a great time. It was a beautiful time at that school. It was a economically, racially, incredibly diverse group of kids that I got to interact with and learn from. And then I kind of got springboarded from there to go to Swarthmore College, which was at the time the number one undergraduate institution um, in the United States. So I was very privileged and very lucky. What I did not have was direction. So my mother used to say I was a B plus in everything, but I needed to find what I was the A plus in. So from a career perspective, I really bounced around quite a bit right after college. I worked serving food in a place that did focus groups. Because back in the day when you did market research, you had to get a whole bunch of people in a room, and the way you got them to stay there was to feed them. Um, I eventually got a job at what was then a big um, advertising firm called J. Walter Thompson because my mom had some connections. I had something approaching the right qualifications. So I got into their executive training program and I quit after 6 months because I was experiencing what I now recognize as really aggressive sexual harassment from my boss's boss. But also, I think I realized that it wasn't really for me. Uh, it wasn't creative, it wasn't exciting. So I left and had my time in the wilderness where I went to grad school. I went to grad school for clinical psychology. And during that time, I got married and had babies and discovered that I really couldn't give birth to a dissertation after having given birth to 4 babies and taking care of them. So I decided kind of on a whim that the suggestion of a good friend of mine, Kevin Varek, who's a very successful group fitness instructor, he said, "You're a really good dancer. You move well. You're personable. Why don't you get a job in group fitness?" So that's what I did. I got a job in group fitness. I was lucky enough to get a job in group fitness teaching one class a week at Google. And I joke that I complained my way from to the top from there. I showed up one day and I said, the studio isn't really clean. Can we do something about that? And they were like, "We'll pay you a little bit extra. Why don't you take care of that?" And I said, attendance has dropped off in all these classes. Have you thought about sending out a survey to figure out why people aren't coming? And they were like, "Well, you have a background in psychological research. Why don't you send out the survey?" And that was how I really discovered my lane in terms of my career, was realizing that what I liked to do was offer solutions and own making that solution happen. And B, that really what excited me was helping people feel happy, engaged, connected to each other at work.
Okay, so group fitness is the name of the company.
No, group fitness is the activity. So I taught kickboxing, boot camp, dance classes. That was my job before I got onto an executive track.
Okay, so let's back up. Let's back up. Okay, undergrad, your major was what?
Philosophy.
Philosophy. You get a bachelor's, then you decide to go for a master's, or did you jump straight to the PhD program? What was
I started out getting a master's in philosophy and quickly realized that there was zero chance that I was going to make a decent living with a PhD in philosophy. So I moved to clinical psychology with the expectation of becoming a therapist.
Okay. And you realized that that was not the path for you. What was the moment?
So it was really two things. One was I had four small children. I had four kids under the age of 8, and my last pregnancy was a high risk pregnancy. I had twins. Um, and I was essentially forced to drop out of the PhD program because I had already taken all of the allowed medical leave. And that was actually really a blessing for me because what it allowed me to realize is that I liked helping people. I found the level of responsibility associated with being a clinician really, really draining and stressful, especially when I was taking care of my own children. So I think that really was how I kind of ended up moving towards something like fitness because fitness really allows you to be there for people. I had so many wonderful experiences of providing people with something that made them feel good about themselves, good about their bodies, excited and happy. Um, but ultimately, the my other intellectual interests, psychology, data analysis, all of those things kind of led me into the employee engagement space because it's a very similar mindset, I would say. The mindset is you're trying to provide an atmosphere, doing things that gets people to be their best, their most productive, their happiest, their most engaged, which is funnily essentially what you're doing when you're teaching any fitness class, right? You're there to get people to be their best. Employee engagement is really about helping people have everything they need to be their best at work.
Okay, so somewhere in that journey, your mother then introduced you to the executive training program.
So that was much earlier than that. That was right out of college.
Uh,
Right out of college, I was looking for a job. I imagine it's similar to the experience people are having now. The job market is a little bit funky right now, and I was, back in the day on my corded telephone, calling places, sending letters folded up in envelopes to companies sending them my resume. But I couldn't find anything that really worked for me on my own. And I was lucky enough to be able to rely on my mom having connections, which I think is something that is a privilege. And I was very lucky that she knew someone who could help me.
let's talk about the moment when you find out that this is not for you. What was your biggest concern? Now you got the hookup from mom. She called out some favors. You have this awakening, this realization. What's your biggest concern as far as your exit? What are you worried about the most?
So I think what I was worried the most about at the time was what I was going to do next. I knew that this is when I was very young, like 22, 23 years old. At that point, I
So
just
like
did
a couple of years ago.
good call. At the time, I I didn't have any direction. And I think that's one of the things that I think is great that I feel is really starting to change in the way we approach our college education. I should not have gone to college probably right out of high school.
Really?
I didn't know what I wanted to do. I spent a lot of money on something that my philosophy degree is wonderful. I use it every day. It's not that the degree wasn't useful, but in terms of if you're looking at it as from a financial investment standpoint, it wasn't a good financial investment. I think it would have been better if I had more direction, more but the where I went to school was very um intellectually stimulating, but there wasn't a lot of guidance around, okay, what are you going to do next? Um and I think it's great that now I see it even with my children in their undergraduate institutions. The institution is a little bit more available to kids to help them figure out what's next.
Wow, that's interesting because most of the, with city tutors, we provide free tutoring and mentorship to anyone from 5 to 55, 6 to 66. But our biggest demographic is college students. And when I talk to the college students, and even when I talk to the professionals like yourself, everybody runs into those moments where they don't know what to do next, when they have no idea. I talk to people who got their law degree, then they realize they hate law, or they jumped into the tech field and then they realize they hate that industry. There's a lot of, why did I do this, or I changed my mind, or I don't, I want to try something else. There's a lot of that. What do you recommend? Do you have a recommendation for young people who might be facing that?
I do. I think the first thing I would recommend is write. Get a notebook and write about what you're struggling with.
Let me unpack that. Write it how? Like as a journal, like as a composition, like as a book? What write it? What? How what?
I journal, bullet points, uh anything. So I this is what I've discovered. When I was in this period of my life when I had no idea what I wanted to do, I got a planner. Um and it had some pages in it that were like, what are your goals for 1 year? What are your goals for 3 years? What are your goals for 5 years? And I just filled it out because I didn't know what else to do. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm gonna fill this thing out, maybe. And I filled it out and kind of went on with my life. I finished with the planner, I put it away, and then I looked at it a couple of years later. I found it and I realized I was doing the things I had written down. I was achieving the goals that I wanted to achieve, that I had written down and committed to. And I think, and I still find that this is true, even, at this point in my life, if I am not sure where I want to be headed, I try to identify the goals that I want to achieve, the life that I want to have 6 months from now, 1 year from now, 3 years from now, and write it down. Because there's something about committing it to paper that makes it real. It's almost another thing that I always recommend to people. If you want to achieve something, tell a bunch of people that you're going to do it. You want to finish your degree in 6 months? Tell 10 people that you're finishing your degree in 6 months. There's nothing more motivating than knowing that there are people watching and waiting to see whether you're going to do it. Sometimes those people are supportive, wonderful people. Sometimes they're people who they're like, is she going to do that? But there's the idea that you've committed to this goal in some form that feels binding is so helpful for keeping going on something, particularly when it's hard, particularly when it's ambiguous, because that's the difficulty, right? When we're living inside an ambiguous space, it's very easy to just sit down and wait when that's the one thing that's not going to get you to the other side of that ambiguous space.
Wow, that is interesting. Now, I live in a world personally where pens are unnecessary almost in my world, right?
Mhm.
Because texting everything, instant messaging everything, Microsoft Word, typing everything into my tablet. But every once in a while, somebody will say, "Oh, you have to sign this," and then I keep a pen around just for my signature. That's it. Does texting the answer to those questions, does that have the same value as actually writing it pen to paper?
I would argue no.
Right.
I think there's something, particularly when you are writing for yourself, the act of writing slows you down a little bit, makes what you're trying to clarify for yourself tangible.
Hmm.
You produce something that you can touch and feel. It makes it feel a little bit more special. I'm also a big believer if it's a big goal and it's something that's special to you, make get a good pen, get a nice notebook, make it almost a little ceremonial. Like I'm writing these things down, I'm committing to them, I'm going to do this in a way that makes it powerful and meaningful. Um, because that's what we so frequently do is have an idea in our head about what we want to achieve and then go around doing 100 other things that are not going to achieve that goal. We do that all the time, right? And that's you do that your whole life. You wake up when you're 60 and you look, wait, what did I just do? What just happened? So really, that's the other thing about having it written down and having it special and having it tactile where you can open up and look at it. You can, um, I do this all the time with my goals. I write them down and I go back and look at them at least once a week. Like, what did I want to achieve this year? Well, I did these 15 things this week that took up all of my time that didn't have anything to do with the thing that said I wanted to achieve. So it really allows you to look at what you're doing and understand, am I doing the thing that I said I wanted to do, or am I being distracted? And those distractions can be anything, right? It can be like suddenly you just spent 3 hours playing a video game, or you just spent the last week working at a job that doesn't use any of your talents, or investing in an an education that doesn't speak to the goals that you have, right? I think that it's funny that you mentioned people not wanting to be lawyers. I know so many people who got law degrees who end up not being lawyers, right? It's like it's an education is an education. It is always useful to learn how to think, right? It's never useless to get an education. But I think there is a way that, particularly some professions, we're driven towards them because of a certain vision of financial freedom or prestige or something that feels uh, like it's the right thing, um, without knowing if it's really the right thing for yourself, right? Um, and I think it's very hard to parse when you're 22, 23 years old. I think that's part of why so many people change careers over time. But like to me, the thing is, what do you want your life to be like? If financial freedom is the most important thing, yeah, banker, lawyer, like chase the money, go for it. But when you really think about it, if what's most important to you is having a good relationship, or like it's really about the vision of what you want your life to be like, not just and really diving into what you want that to be so that you can align those goals.
Okay. So, well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for your time. Uh, Thank you for sharing these thoughts. And I don't wanna take up too much of your time. I don't wanna take up too much of your day because I know you have a lot of hard celebrating to do for Women's History Month. So I'm gonna make this the last question, but I'm going to allow you the freedom to take as long as you want to answer it. I feel like I may have interrupted your answer when you had mentioned writing stuff down, and I interjected to say writing how doesn't matter how you write. So I may have interrupted your answer. So I'll rephrase the question. I'll volley the ball back to you. Uh you sound like you're living a beautiful life. You sound like you're living your best life. Uh what do the young people who I meet so many young people who think that moment that they're going through at 19, at 22 is the end of the world, right? I meet so many like that. They think it's the end of the world, like, oh, I can't do this for the rest of my life, and it's, a job at Starbucks or something. What do they need to know? Have you found the secret sauce for them? What thing they need to? Did I interrupt it? Was writing the answer? What is it?
So I think writing is still the answer. I think writing down, what do you want to do in 6 months? Where do you want to be in 6 months? I guess is a better way to put it. Where do you want to be in a year? Where do you want to be in 3 years? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Right? So when you get up in the morning to go to that job at Starbucks, if what you want 6 months from now is to have $5,000 saved, you get up and you go to that job and you put that post-it right next to your door, $5,000. That's why I'm doing this. I think even when we're going through something that is arduous or unpleasant or terrible, there's kind of no way to get through it but to go through it. But if you have that thing that you know that you want to achieve in mind, I feel like it can help you keep putting one foot in front of the other. But then I guess the other thing I would say is almost all feelings are temporary, right? I just recently was cleaning out an old email account and I found an email that I had drafted like 7 or 8 years ago to a boss who I was super upset with. I was, my role wasn't being clarified. I didn't know where I was going to be sitting, what I was going to be doing. I was super frustrated, feeling very held back. And I read this email that I had written. I'm pretty sure I didn't send it. I hope I didn't. And I looked at it. I was like, I was so angry. I have zero recollection of writing this. I have zero recollection. Like when I read it, I was like, oh yeah, I remember I was so frustrated. I really wanted to achieve more and I felt like I was being held back. And that's why I was so mad. And I looked at it, I was like, wow, this doesn't matter at all right now. So I think it feels permanent. It feels like it can't be overcome, but it almost always 6 months from now, a year from now, you're probably not even going to remember what it was.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for joining me in the celebration of Women's History Month. My favorite people on the planet are women. My daughters, my sister, my mother, who's looking down on it. I have very little use for men, so women deserve a year, not just a month. Women's History Year. I don't know what we would do if women didn't exist. So I appreciate the acknowledgement of Women's History Month, and I appreciate your time and your sharing and all that good stuff. But thank you for joining us.
No, thank you. And you know what? We don't need Women's History Month, but what we need is like we all need to be working together, right? We need to all hold hands and support each other. We need to hold hands and make sure that we're bringing everybody along. That's, to me, the most important thing.
You know, I almost hate that you said that, because that could open up a whole nother conversation, right? You just triggered 5 more questions in my brain, right? But I already did the sweet exit, so I'm gonna restrain myself and not ask you any more questions to unpack that. But thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure.